Tonight, you walk through frozen churchyards before dawn, carrying a shovel, a lantern, and the uncomfortable knowledge that half the village avoids looking you in the eye. You are the medieval gravedigger, the man who works while the bells toll, the snow falls, and the dead quietly outnumber the living beneath the earth. Medieval life was not heroic, not glamorous, and honestly, the smell alone probably would have ended most of us by day 3. So before we step into the mud and candlelight together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these quiet journeys into the past. Now, lower the lights and let the bells guide you into tonight's story. Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing beneath the leaning shadow of a small stone church while the last of the evening fog crawls low across the graves like pale river smoke. Your boots sink into wet earth almost immediately, which feels unfair considering you have walked less than 20 steps since arriving. The bells above you groan once in the cold air, slow and hollow, and somewhere beyond the churchyard wall a dog barks at absolutely nothing, which, in medieval villages, usually means either spirits, thieves, or a goat behaving suspiciously again. The air smells of damp straw, wood smoke, wet wool, and freshly turned mud. Torchlight flickers near the lich gate where 2 villagers whisper beneath fur-lined cloaks, their breath drifting silver into the winter dark. Beneath your gloves, your fingers already ache from cold, and you begin to understand that medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. The roads are mostly mud, the ale is mostly disappointment, and the mattresses are apparently stuffed with stones, nettles, or old regrets. You probably would not last a week out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in tonight, feel free to comment your location and local time as these monastery bells carry us together into another long medieval night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand quietly beside the churchyard wall while frost gathers silver along the edges of crooked grave markers. The church itself is small, older than anyone in the village can quite agree upon, built from uneven stone darkened by centuries of rain and smoke. Moss clings to the lower walls. Thin candlelight glows through narrow windows no wider than a man's hand. Above, the wooden bell tower leans just enough to make strangers nervous. And now, somehow, this place is where you work. Not as priest, not as scribe, not as knight or merchant or wandering pilgrim with shining tails and polished boots. No, you are the gravedigger, which means most people speak to you politely while also trying not to stand too close. The old sexton, a bent man named Odo, whose beard smells permanently of onions and candle wax, waits beside an open tool shed near the church wall. He lifts a lantern as you approach. Its dim flame reveals shovels, wooden spades, coils of rope, and a handcart missing one wheel rim. "Ground's softer near the ash tree," he mutters, "hard as monastery bread everywhere else." You soon learn this is considered useful advice. Odo hands you a heavy iron spade polished smooth by generations of hands. The wood is dark with age and damp from mist, he explains, in the patient tone of a man who has repeated the same instructions for 40 winters, that graves must be deep enough to discourage wandering dogs, but shallow enough to avoid flooding when the spring rains arrive. "No one thanks the digger when the dead float upward," he says. A comforting thought for your first evening. You follow him through rows of leaning stones while the church bells finish their slow prayer hour. Rushes crunch beneath your boots where they have been scattered along the path to keep travellers from slipping in mud. Some graves are marked with carved crosses. Others have only plain wooden boards already softening from rot. A few possess no marker at all. Those belong mostly to paupers, strangers, or people no one wished to remember for very long. The villagers carry many quiet beliefs about graveyards. Some swear iron nails driven into coffin lids keep restless spirits asleep. Others leave bread near fresh graves during winter, so wandering souls will not envy the living. Even now, it is hard to tell whether anyone truly believes these customs or simply fears being the first person to stop. The wind shifts through the yew trees overhead. Somewhere beyond the fields, wolves howl faintly, or perhaps only dogs. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Odo leads you toward a fresh mound near the far wall, where the earth has partially collapsed after heavy rain. You kneel beside it while cold mud soaks instantly through your hose. The smell rising from the ground is not terrible exactly, merely deep and wet and old, like soaked roots beneath forest leaves. You repair the sinking earth carefully with a wooden shovel. This, you discover, is much of grave digging. Not grand burials, not mysterious midnight rites, mostly mud. An astonishing quantity of mud. The churchyard itself rests beside a narrow road used by traders, pilgrims, and livestock drovers travelling between market towns. Their wheels carve deep ruts into the frozen ground. Pilgrims sometimes stop to pray at the roadside shrine outside the wall, leaving tiny wax offerings before a painted saint whose face has nearly vanished beneath soot and weather. A little later, you pass beneath the church porch where bundles of herbs hang drying from rafters blackened by candle smoke. Rosemary for remembrance, rue against evil spirits, lavender for calming the sick. One old widow insists garlic protects against graveyard wandering, though most suspect she simply enjoys putting garlic into everything including ale. You sit briefly beside the porch steps while Odo lights a beeswax candle stub inside a lantern. The warm glow paints the frost gold around your boots. Listen long enough, he says quietly, and every churchyard begins speaking. You're not entirely certain whether this is wisdom, or merely what happens when a man spends 40 years digging holes beside damp stones. Still, as silence settles around the graves, you begin hearing small things. Wind brushing dead grass. A loose shutter tapping somewhere in the village. The distant creak of cartwheels. The steady drip of thawing frost from the church roof. And beneath it all, the strange stillness that belongs only to places where generations sleep side by side beneath the same cold earth. Before dawn, villagers will come carrying candles for morning prayers. Children will chase chickens through muddy lanes. Bakers will haul coarse bread from ovens. Somewhere nearby, monks in the abbey miles away will wake to ring their bells long before sunrise because medieval religion apparently believes exhaustion builds character. But for now, the village sleeps. You continue working by lantern light beside Odo until your shoulders ache and your hands numb inside damp gloves. The old sexton occasionally hums fragments of hymns under his breath. Once, he pauses to spit into the grass and warns you never to whistle in graveyards after dark. Calls the dead upward, he says. Then, after a moment, he shrugs. Or maybe thieves, hard to say. The fog thickens deeper across the graves. A thin crescent moon hangs above the bell tower. At last. Odo leads you toward a narrow shed built against the church wall where graveyard tools are kept dry beneath patched roofing straw. Inside waits a rough wooden bench, a pile of wool blankets, and enough drafty wind to convince you the walls are largely decorative. Still, after hours in the freezing churchyard, it feels strangely welcoming. You remove your muddy boots near the door and sit listening to the distant bells fading across the valley. The wool blanket smells faintly of smoke and sheep. A mouse rustles somewhere beneath the straw. Outside, the churchyard settles again into silence beneath frost and moonlight. And slowly, while the candle burns lower beside the wall, you begin understanding the quiet rhythm of this life. Cold mornings, wet earth, soft bells. The endless patience of stone. Morning arrives slowly, not with sunlight exactly, but with a thinning of darkness over the churchyard and the long groan of monastery bells drifting across the valley through freezing mist. You wake beneath the wool blanket with stiff shoulders and one boot somehow colder than the other, which feels impressive considering both boots spent the night beside a wall made entirely of winter. The candle beside you has burned down into a puddle of hardened wax. Outside, frost whitens the graves. The village rooster begins shouting insults at dawn somewhere beyond the churchyard hedge, and almost immediately another rooster answers from farther downhill, as though deeply offended by the first rooster's opinions. Medieval mornings possess very little dignity. You sit up slowly while your breath clouds the dim shed. Damp hay crackles beneath your boots. Nearby, Odo already moves about the yard carrying a lantern despite the coming dawn. He appears to sleep roughly as much as monastery cats or suspicious ghosts. "You're alive," he says, sounding mildly surprised. "High praise." The graveyard looks different in morning light, less mysterious perhaps, though not necessarily kinder. Thin frost clings to every blade of grass and every crooked wooden marker. Ravens perch atop the stone wall, watching with the calm confidence of creatures who know this is eventually everyone's destination anyway. You follow Odo toward the ash tree at the far end of the yard where the ground lies softer beneath layers of fallen leaves. Your boots crunch over frozen earth while smoke rises from village chimneys beyond the wall. Somewhere nearby, women draw water from the communal well. A blacksmith begins hammering before sunrise because apparently sparks and exhaustion are considered a perfectly reasonable breakfast. Today's work waits beside the ash tree. A burial before noon. Not a wealthy burial, no carved coffin or polished monument. Merely a village cooper who died after a fever carried through the valley during the last rains. His widow paid partly in smoked fish and partly in candles, which the church accepted after lengthy discussion involving 2 priests and one extremely determined chicken wandering through the meeting. Medieval accounting can become surprisingly complicated. Odo kneels beside the marked ground and presses a mittened hand against the frost. "Dig before the sun rises fully," he mutters. "Once the thaw starts, the mud turns greedy." You are beginning to suspect mud here possesses its own personality. The first strike of the spade rings dull against frozen earth. Cold jolts through your arms immediately. You work slowly, boots slipping against icy grass while the horizon lightens from charcoal grey into pale silver. Steam rises faintly from your breath and shoulders. Beneath the frozen crust, the soil grows dark, wet and heavy. The smell of fresh earth unfolds gradually. Wet roots, clay, rotting leaves, old rain trapped beneath the ground. You fall into rhythm. Lift. Drive. Turn. Lift again. Above you, bells ring from the distant abbey to mark prime, one of the monastery prayer hours. The monks divide their entire lives by bells waking, praying, eating, working, sleeping. Some swear monks can tell the hour in their dreams merely by the shape of silence between bells. Others insist monks never truly sleep at all and simply stare thoughtfully into candlelight until dawn. No one can quite agree whether either version is worse. As the grave deepens, Odo busies himself preparing ropes and wooden boards nearby. He occasionally stops to rub warmth into his hands or mutter complaints about winter. Summer burials smell worse, he says after a while, but winter burials fight harder. This appears to be another piece of grave-digger wisdom. By sunrise, villagers begin crossing the road outside the churchyard. A milkmaid balancing pails nods carefully toward you, but avoids looking directly into the grave. 2 boys carrying firewood pause to stare until an older woman hurries them onward with the sign of the cross. Gravediggers live strangely close to everyone while remaining slightly apart. Necessary but unsettling. Like dentists. A narrow cart creaks past the church wall carrying turnips covered with frost cloth. The driver calls greetings toward Odo, then immediately spits over his shoulder for luck after passing the open grave. You notice this often. People fear open graves. Some believe wandering spirits linger nearby before burial rites finish properly. Others think empty graves invite misfortune if left unattended overnight. In certain villages, families place iron scissors beneath beds after funerals to prevent the dead from revisiting dreams. One old woman nearby hangs tiny bells beside her doorway so ghosts become politely noisy before entering. Honestly, compared to wolves and plague, the ghosts almost sound considerate. The ground grows harder again several feet down. Your shoulders ache fiercely now. Blisters begin forming beneath your palms despite wool wrappings around the spade handle. Odo watches with approval. "You'll do," he says. Again a remarkably warm praise. At mid-morning, the parish priest arrives through the lich gate wrapped in a fur-lined cloak with frost gathered along his beard. Father Aldrich is thin as a candle taper and smells faintly of incense even outdoors. He carries a small oak box beneath one arm and steps carefully around muddy ground with the tragic expression of a man who knows his boots cost real money. He peers into the grave. "A little deeper," he says gently. Of course. You continue digging while he speaks quietly with Odo nearby. Their voices drift across the cold air between bell chimes and raven calls. The cooper's widow cannot afford many candles. The church expects grain payments after spring planting. A cousin from another village may arrive late. Someone must repair the cracked churchyard gate before lambing season. Life and death mingle constantly here without ceremony. Graves beside turnips, prayer beside muddy boots, monastery bells beside arguments about fence posts. At last, Father Aldrich kneels near the grave edge and opens the oak box. Inside rests a small clay jar of blessed earth, brought from a pilgrimage shrine many years ago. Only a pinch remains. "Scatter this beneath the coffin boards," he tells you quietly. His wife requested it. You nod carefully. Pilgrims often bring back strange things from holy roads, Saint bones of uncertain authenticity, tiny ampullae of holy water, painted badges, relic fragments, scraps of cloth touched to shrines. Some swear these objects heal illness or calm storms. Others quietly suspect half the relics in Christendom once belonged to entirely unrelated sheep. Still, people believe, and belief itself carries warmth during hard winters. The grave finally reaches proper depth near midday. Your arms tremble from effort. Mud stains your tunic to the knees. Frost has melted now into slick clay beneath your boots. You climb upward carefully while Odo measures the depth using a worn wooden rod marked by knife cuts from years long forgotten. He nods once. "Good enough," he says, which, in this profession, apparently counts as triumph. The widow arrives shortly afterward wrapped in dark wool beside 2 silent neighbours, carrying candles protected within horn lanterns. They stand quietly near the ash tree while cold wind stirs branches overhead. No dramatic crying, no grand speeches, just tired sorrow. That seems common here too. The dead continue arriving no matter how exhausted the living become. You step aside while Father Aldrich murmurs prayers over the open earth. Ravens shuffle along the church wall nearby, watching everything with irritating confidence. Somewhere down the road, merchants already call prices in the growing market square while smoke rises warmly from cook fires. Life continuing only a few hundred feet from fresh graves. The bells ring once more across the valley, and beneath the pale winter sky, you lower your gaze toward the dark earth you opened with your own hands. The Cooper is buried before the noon bell. Not quickly exactly, because almost nothing in medieval villages happens quickly except rumours and occasional food poisoning, but with the slow, careful rhythm that belongs to old rituals repeated across generations. The widow stands beside the ash tree holding a beeswax candle shielded from the wind beneath her cloak. Father Aldrich chants prayers in a low, steady voice, while frostwater drips softly from the church roof nearby. You remain near the grave with Odo, waiting beside the ropes. The coffin itself is plain oak, rough cut and narrow, built by the Cooper's brother 2 nights earlier by lantern light. No polished fittings, no carved saints, only a simple iron cross nailed crookedly to the lid. Still, the iron nails matter. Some swear iron keeps harmful spirits away from the newly dead. Others claim the metal merely discourages grave robbers, given the condition of certain nearby villages during hard winters. Honestly, both explanations seem entirely possible. The coffin lowers slowly into the grave. Rope creaks. Wet earth shifts. The widow closes her eyes as Father Aldrich scatters holy earth across the lid. Then silence settles for a moment beneath the bare branches overhead. Even the ravens stop moving. You always expect something larger at funerals, perhaps. Thunder, miracles, some great heavenly sign. But most medieval deaths arrive quietly. A few prayers, cold hands, muddy boots, then back to daily life, because goats still escape fences and bread still burns if nobody watches the oven. Father Aldrich remains after the mourners leave. He stands beside the graveyard wall, pulling his gloves tighter while pale winter sunlight struggles weakly through the clouds. Beyond the churchyard, smoke curls upward from cook fires across the village. The smell reaches you faintly: onions, pottage, coarse bread, maybe smoked eel from the river traders. You suddenly realize you're starving. The priest notices immediately. Grave digging sharpens appetite, he says, perhaps because the dead eat so little. A surprisingly dry joke from a parish priest. You begin liking him slightly more. Odo wanders off toward the tool shed while Father Aldrich motions for you to walk with him beneath the church porch. The stone floor there remains damp even in winter, covered with old rushes changed only every few weeks. They smell faintly of rosemary and mildew. Above the doorway hangs a small painted carving of St. Bartholomew, whose expression suggests centuries of disappointment. The priest removes one glove carefully. His fingers are ink-stained. Not unusual for clergy, priests spend half their lives handling candles, books, and documents proving someone owes either God, taxes, or chickens to someone else. You worked steadily this morning, he says. That matters here. You nod uncertainly. Father Aldrich studies the graveyard through drifting mist. The church bells remain silent now between prayer hours. Somewhere nearby a cartwheel rattles along frozen stones. There are customs you should know, he says at last. People notice such things. That sentence alone contains the full weight of medieval village life. People notice everything. Who attends prayers? Who drinks too heavily? Who whispers during funerals? Who steals onions? Who walks past roadside shrines without crossing themselves? Especially who steals onions? The priest explains while you listen beside the porch. Fresh graves should not remain open after sunset unless absolutely necessary. Children are discouraged from playing among the stones after dark, though naturally this guarantees they do exactly that. No tools used for graves should enter the church itself, and under no circumstances should anyone whistle near burials. Because of spirits, you ask? Father Aldrich pauses, mostly because Odo becomes unbearable about it. Fair enough. Still, the villagers believe many strange things surrounding death. Some families place bowls of salt near bodies before burial to keep evil from settling inside empty flesh. Others cover mirrors after a death so souls do not become trapped within reflections. In one riverside hamlet several miles south, people supposedly stop clocks during funerals despite there being only 2 clocks in the entire village and one belonging to a goat merchant widely considered cursed. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these customs rise from faith, fear, or simple habit carried too long to question anymore. Father Aldrich leads you inside the church. Warmth greets you first, then candle smoke, then the deep quiet unique to old stone buildings. The nave is small and dim beneath soot-dark rafters. Beeswax candles flicker beside painted saints faded nearly pale by centuries of smoke. Along the walls stand rough wooden pews polished smooth by generations of hands and winter cloaks. The floor beneath your boots consists partly of worn stone and partly of graves themselves. Important villagers sometimes request burial beneath church floors rather than outside in the yard, closer to holy ground, closer to prayers, closer, perhaps, to mercy. The priest kneels briefly before the altar, while you stand awkwardly nearby trying not to drip mud onto anything sacred. Sunlight filters weakly through coloured glass, painting tiny stains of red and gold across the stone. "You'll help more funerals soon enough," Father Aldrich says quietly without looking up. "Hard winter coming." You glance toward the candles. How can you tell? He rises slowly. The birds left early. The abbey ordered extra grain storage, and old Marta's knees ache whenever snow approaches. A remarkably advanced meteorological system. You follow him toward a side chamber where records are kept. Shelves line the walls filled with parchment rolls, wax seals, and books chained to wooden desks. The room smells of dust, ink, damp wool, and mouse droppings. A young scribe sits near the window copying names into a ledger with painful concentration. Ink stains cover his fingers, sleeves, and somehow part of his forehead. He glances up nervously as you enter. "Mind the parchments," Father Aldrich warns him gently. "Last week you nearly recorded a baptism in onion soup." The scribe blushes deeply. Apparently church administration remains chaotic in every century. The priest removes a narrow ledger from the shelf and opens it beneath candlelight. Inside are names stretching back decades: births, deaths, marriages, burials, tiny histories written carefully across yellowed pages. Most entries are brief. Marjorie Weaver fever. Thomas Miller drowned crossing river. Infant son a named winter sickness. You realize suddenly how small lives appear once reduced to ink. Yet someone still writes them down. Someone remembers. Father Aldrich closes the book softly. "Gravediggers hear things," he says after a while. "Confessions people never bring priests. Village fears, old stories." Outside, the bells begin again for the afternoon hour. Slow, measured, comforting in their repetition. "You need not encourage superstition," he continues, "but neither should you mock it. Fear keeps many people gentle. You think about the widow beside the ash tree, the iron nails, the salt bowls, the candle flames trembling in cold wind. Perhaps he is right. When you finally leave the church, clouds already gather darker across the valley. Snow perhaps later tonight. The air smells sharper now, edged with distant rain and chimney smoke. Odo waits beside the shed, chewing coarse bread hard enough to repair castle walls. He tosses you half. You nearly break a tooth immediately. Good, isn't it? He says proudly. You chew for a full minute before answering. The graveyard settles again into afternoon quiet around you. A dog wanders between the stones, sniffing carefully near older graves. Smoke drifts low beyond the church wall. Farther down the muddy road, market voices rise faintly through the cold. And somewhere beneath the damp earth near the ash tree, the cooper rests while winter slowly approaches the valley one bell at a time. By the next morning, market day arrives beneath a sky the colour of wet wool. You wake before dawn again, though this time the bells reach you first, rolling low through the valley while frost crackles along the churchyard grass outside the shed, somewhere nearby. Odo coughs like an elderly chimney attempting to clear itself. The wool blanket smells faintly less terrible than yesterday, which either means you're adapting or losing important survival instincts. Possibly both. Cold air seeps through every crack in the wooden walls. You pull on stiff boots beside the dying lantern while distant cartwheels begin rattling along the road toward the village square. Market day transforms the entire valley. Farmers, traders, tinkers, pilgrims, shepherds, fishmongers, herbal women, and at least 3 suspicious men selling miracle cures all descend upon the village before sunrise. Medieval people truly will buy anything if you promise it prevents plague. Outside, dawn creeps slowly over the graves. Thin smoke curls from cottage chimneys beyond the churchyard wall. Horses snort clouds into freezing air while merchants guide overloaded carts through muddy ruts near the lich gate. Bells continue ringing from the abbey far off among the hills, steady as breathing. You help Odo clear wet branches fallen near the church path before visitors arrive. The old sexton mutters constantly while working. Pilgrims trample everything. A branch snaps beneath your boot. Merchants steal fence posts. A raven lands atop the wall. And goats, he says darkly, cannot be trusted at all. This appears to be a deeply held belief. By sunrise, the market square beyond the churchyard hums with noise and smoke. You wander there carrying a small sack of candles Father Aldrich asked delivered to the apothecary stall. Mud sucks greedily at your boots the entire way. The village road has become a thick brown river of wagon ruts, horse dung, spilled straw, and slush. Children dart between carts wrapped in oversized wool cloaks. A pig escapes somewhere near the baker's stall, causing immediate panic among precisely the people least capable of running quickly. You pass beneath timbered houses leaning toward each other across narrow lanes blackened by chimney soot. Above one doorway hangs a faded horseshoe for luck. Another displays bundles of dried herbs tied with red thread to ward away illness. Some swear rosemary protects homes from wandering spirits. Others insist onions hung near doors absorb plague from the air. One man apparently trusts cabbage. The market itself spreads across the square beside the well and manor granary. Canvas awnings flap sharply in the wind. Merchants shout prices over each other while smoke from roasting chestnuts mingles with smells of damp wool, fish brine, beeswax, leather, and wet animals. It is strangely lively after the silence of graves. You pause near a fish seller hacking river trout apart atop a wooden block, while nearby women bargain aggressively over turnips. A travelling peddler displays pilgrim badges pinned to cloth rolls, tiny lead symbols shaped like saints, shrines, crossed keys, and scallop shells. Pilgrims wear them proudly after visiting holy sites, or at least claim they visited. No one can quite agree whether some badges are genuine or simply produced in alarming quantities by men with excellent imaginations and weak morals. An old woman catches your sleeve as you pass. "You work the churchyard now," she says immediately. News travels quickly. Her fingers smell strongly of garlic and lavender. Around her neck hangs a tiny leather pouch stuffed with herbs. For restless sleep, she explains before you even ask, and burial dreams. Burial dreams apparently require separate treatment. She presses a small dried flower into your palm. "Keep it near your bed, stops the dead from whispering." You thank her politely because refusing folk remedies in medieval villages usually leads to people discussing your suspicious behaviour for the next decade. At the edge of the square, a pair of monks from the abbey distribute small loaves of coarse bread to the poor. Their brown robes sway in cold wind while iron bells tied near a mule cart clink softly. One monk reads notices aloud from a parchment scroll. New tolls on bridge crossings, warnings about wolves in northern woods, reminders about upcoming feast days. The villagers barely listen until he mentions taxes. Then suddenly everyone hears perfectly. You continue toward the apothecary stall beside the well. Shelves beneath striped cloth display jars of herbs, dried berries, wax packets, and cloudy bottles whose contents you wisely avoid identifying too closely. The apothecary herself, Marta, squints at you through wisps of white hair escaping her hood. "So," she says, "you're the new gravedigger." Apparently your entire personality now fits within this single occupation. She takes the candles carefully before exchanging them for a bundle wrapped in cloth. For Father Aldrich, willow bark and mint leaves. Medicine, or soup ingredients. Sometimes difficult to distinguish here. Marta studies you while market noise swirls around the stall. "You hear anything strange yet?" You hesitate. "In the graveyard." She nods. Voices, footsteps, bells after midnight. Nearby, a goat begins chewing someone's laundry from a basket without permission. You consider your answer carefully. Mostly mud, you admit. Marta bursts into laughter sharp enough to startle nearby pigeons. "Good," she says, "means you still belong to the living." An encouraging sentence overall, though perhaps phrased oddly. Before returning to the churchyard, you wander briefly past the ale sellers and cloth merchants near the southern lane. A jongleur performs tricks beside the tavern, using painted cups and polished stones, while children gather around him wide-eyed, despite several adults loudly insisting they understand exactly how the tricks work. They absolutely do not. Beyond him, a tanner stretches hides across wooden frames, filling the entire corner of the square with a smell so powerful it could probably remove wallpaper from castles. You retreat immediately. Near the well, two pilgrims warm their hands above a brazier while speaking softly about relics seen far south beyond the mountains. One swears he witnessed a saint's finger preserved inside crystal. The other claims an abbey displayed feathers from the Archangel Gabriel. Even now, it is hard to tell whether pilgrims exaggerate intentionally or whether long roads simply reshape memory into something warmer and stranger. By midday, clouds gather thicker overhead. Snow threatens again. You return through the lich gate carrying Marta's bundle, while Father Aldrich oversees repairs on the churchyard fence where recent rains loosened stones. Odo sits nearby sharpening tools with a whetstone while muttering darkly about children climbing walls during funerals. The graveyard feels quieter after the market. Still. Cold. The bells ring softly across the valley once more. You pause beside the ash tree where yesterday's grave already settles beneath damp earth and scattered frost. Someone has left a tiny loaf of bread there wrapped in cloth. An offering, perhaps, or remembrance. Wind moves gently through bare branches overhead while distant market sounds drift faintly beyond the walls. somewhere a dog barks again toward empty fields. And slowly, standing among graves while village life swirls nearby beyond stone walls and winter smoke, you begin understanding how the living and dead share this place together, separated only by soil, bells, and time. Rain begins before dawn and never fully stops. Not proper dramatic storm rain with thunder and flashing skies, just the endless medieval sort, thin, cold, determined rain that drifts sideways through every cloak seam and settles into the ground until roads dissolve into brown soup. By morning, the churchyard resembles a battlefield between mud and dignity is losing badly. You stand beneath the church porch, tightening the rope around your cloak, while water drips steadily from the roof onto your boots. The bells sound muffled in the wet air. Smoke hangs low over the village beyond the wall, unable to rise properly beneath the heavy clouds. Odo spits rainwater from his beard. "Bad day for burying," he mutters. Unfortunately, the dead rarely consult weather conditions first. Today's burial is small even by village standards. A pauper woman from the edge of the river quarter, old enough that no one agrees precisely how old. She lived alone in a hut near the marsh road, sold bundles of reeds during summer, and spent winters mending nets for fishermen who mostly paid in scraps of eel and stale bread. Father Aldrich says her name was Edith. Odo thinks perhaps Agnes. The fishmongers insist she answered to both depending on who owed her money. No family has come forward. No carved coffin waits beside the graveyard shed. Only a simple winding cloth and a rough pine board borrowed from the cooper's brother. You help prepare the grave near the outer wall where poorer villagers often rest beneath smaller markers. Rain darkens the earth immediately. Your shovel sinks deep with every strike. Mud grips your boots so fiercely you nearly leave one behind climbing from the grave, which would certainly create difficult questions during future excavations. The work goes slower today. Rain softens the soil but makes everything heavier. Wet clay clings to the spade. Water gathers near the grave bottom faster than you can scoop it clear. Your shoulders ache almost immediately beneath damp wool. Nearby, Father Aldrich shelters beneath a lantern hood while reading prayers softly from a leather book swollen by moisture. Even the pages appear miserable. Dig channels, Odo advises, else she'll float by spring. You sincerely hope this is merely practical instruction and not local prophecy. A pair of village women arrive shortly before noon, carrying candles wrapped beneath cloth to keep the flames alive. One of them leaves rosemary near the grave edge. The other mutters blessings beneath her breath while glancing nervously toward the yew trees. Some swear spirits linger longer during rainstorms because heaven's gates become harder to find through clouds. Others claim rain during funerals means angels are grieving. A baker once argued it simply means weather continues functioning normally regardless of human tragedy. No one invited him to many gatherings afterward. The pauper woman's body arrives on a handcart pulled by two fishermen from the river quarter. They remove their caps respectfully despite rain soaking their hair flat against their foreheads. The winding cloth covering the body is already darkened with moisture. One fisherman crosses himself. The other avoids looking directly at the grave. You notice again how uncomfortable open earth makes people. Even now, after weeks beside the churchyard, the sight unsettles you too. A narrow doorway cut into mud and silence, cold space waiting patiently beneath the rain. Father Aldrich begins the burial rites while droplets hiss softly against lantern flame. The prayers are simple today. No choir, no incense, no noble mourners wrapped in fur. Only wet cloaks, muddy boots, and 4 villagers standing quietly beneath grey skies while bells drift faintly through rain from the abbey beyond the hills. The fishermen lower the body carefully. Rope creaks softly. Rain taps against wood. The rosemary leaves tremble in cold wind. You help guide the burial board into place while Father Aldrich scatters holy earth across the cloth. Mud streaks your sleeves black nearly to the elbows. Water runs constantly down your neck beneath the collar. One of the women whispers suddenly, "She feared the churchyard after dark." Father Aldrich pauses gently. Many do. The woman nods toward the outer graves. She swore lanterns walked here at night. Rain drips from her hood. Blue lights between stones. Odo snorts quietly beside you. "Marsh gas," he says. Then, after a pause, he adds, "Probably." A deeply reassuring word. Those who tell the tale never fully agree about the lights. Some claim wandering souls carry candles searching for unfinished prayers. Others insist smugglers once crossed the fields at night with hooded lanterns. A drunk shepherd apparently blamed enchanted sheep for several years. Honestly, the shepherd may have been drunk enough to convince himself. The burial ends quickly as rain worsens. The villagers linger only a moment before retreating toward the road with lowered heads against the weather. Soon, only you, Odo, and Father Aldrich remain beside the grave. The priest removes wet gloves carefully. "She deserved better," he says quietly. No one answers immediately, because perhaps that sentence applies to many people buried here. You begin filling the grave. Mud slides heavily from the shovel. Rainwater pools around your boots. Your fingers have gone nearly numb despite thick gloves. Nearby, Odo drives a wooden marker into the earth using the back of his spade. No name carved yet. Perhaps none later either. The rain continues. Slow, steady, almost hypnotic. Beyond the churchyard wall, village life moves onward despite weather and burial alike. Smoke rises from cook fires. A blacksmith's hammer rings faintly through mist. Somewhere down the muddy road, merchants shout beneath dripping awnings while geese complain loudly about existence in general. You work until the grave becomes only another mound among many. Fresh earth. Wet rosemary. One simple marker leaning slightly crooked in the rain. By late afternoon, your cloak weighs nearly as much as chainmail from absorbed water. Father Aldrich finally orders you and Odo inside before illness claims both gravediggers and creates unnecessary paperwork. The church interior feels wonderfully warm after the storm despite still being cold enough to freeze weak soup. Candles flicker beside damp stone walls, while rain rattles softly against narrow windows. Odo hangs soaked cloaks near the hearthroom and immediately begins complaining about his joints. "Rain gets into the bones," he mutters. Marta the apothecary apparently agrees. She arrives not long afterward carrying a steaming pot of herb broth smelling strongly of garlic, onions, and thyme. According to local belief, garlic wards illness, evil spirits, marsh fevers, and disappointing relatives. A remarkably versatile plant. You sit beside the small hearth while steam curls upward into soot-dark rafters. Father Aldrich dries parchment pages carefully near candlelight. Marta removes wet gloves finger by finger while speaking softly about flooding near the river quarter. Outside, rain still falls across the graves. You imagine the fresh mound near the outer wall slowly darkening beneath weather and evening mist. One more life settling quietly beneath earth. One more story already fading from memory except for a few fishermen, a priest, 2 village women, and the gravedigger who helped lower her into silence. The bells ring again for evening prayer. Soft through rain, soft through smoke. And while warmth finally reaches your hands beside the little hearth, the churchyard waits patiently beyond the walls beneath the endless drifting winter rain. By nightfall the rain finally weakens into drifting mist, though the cold remains settled deep inside the stones of the village like something old and stubborn refusing to leave. Water drips steadily from roof edges while puddles reflect the glow of lanterns along the muddy lanes. The church bells ring for vespers one last time before silence folds slowly over the valley. And for the first time in several days, Odo announces that you're going to the alehouse. Not a celebration exactly. More as survival. Warmth keeps men alive through winter, he says while tightening his cloak. Ale merely improves the process. You suspect this philosophy has guided much of medieval Europe. The alehouse sits near the lower market road beneath a sagging timber roof blackened by decades of smoke. Light spills warmly through shutters onto the wet street outside. As you approach, the smell reaches you first: roasted onions, damp wool, spilled ale, wood smoke, and humanity in all its complicated medieval glory. Inside, warmth hits like a blanket. A low fire crackles beneath the central hearth, while villagers crowd along benches with steaming cups clasped between cold hands. Rushes scatter across the floor to soak mud and spilled drink alike, though judging by the smell, several layers of older rushes still remain beneath them, quietly fermenting into history. A fiddler plays softly near the far wall. Someone coughs. Someone laughs too loudly. A dog sleeps beneath a bench with the absolute confidence of a creature paying no rent whatsoever. You and Odo settle near the hearth while the tavern keeper, a broad woman named Isabel, brings dark ale in heavy clay cups without even asking. The graveyard survived the rain, then she asks. Barely, Odo replies. Isabel nods as though discussing wounded soldiers. The ale tastes smoky and sour and slightly thick, though wonderfully warm after hours in damp weather. Medieval ale often contains less alcohol than people later imagine, safer to drink than questionable well water, and consumed in astonishing quantities by nearly everyone, including children, monks, and apparently several goats if left unattended long enough. You warm your hands around the cup while rain taps softly against shutters outside. The alehouse hums quietly with market day exhaustion. Traders dry cloaks near the fire. Farmers discuss grain prices in low voices. A pair of pilgrims wrapped in patched wool compare blisters beside the wall, while studying a hand-drawn map so inaccurate it may actually worsen travel. At the neighbouring table, an old shepherd recounts a story involving wolves, stolen sheep, and a monk who supposedly fought off danger using only holy water and extremely aggressive shouting. No one appears entirely convinced. Marta the apothecary sits near the hearth sorting herbs into small cloth bundles while listening to gossip without seeming to listen at all. Beside her, Father Aldrich speaks softly with the blacksmith over accounts for repairing the churchyard gate. The priest notices you watching. Still alive, he asks. Mostly, you answer. Good. Winter dislikes optimism. Again, remarkably dry humour for a clergyman. Isabel returns carrying bowls of thick pottage filled with barley, onions, carrots, and what may once have been rabbit before encountering unfortunate circumstances. Coarse bread accompanies it, dense enough that you briefly consider whether the loaf previously served defensive military purposes. Still, the food warms you wonderfully. Steam rises into the dim rafters where smoke curls slowly through roof vents. Candlelight flickers across tired faces. Outside, wind brushes rain against the shutters, while somewhere far off the monastery bells mark the late prayer hour. You begin understanding why medieval people treasure firelight so deeply. Darkness outside feels immense, but inside this room, there is warmth and broth and voices and breathing, and the comforting knowledge that everyone here survived another cold day. The fiddler shifts into a slower tune. A merchant near the wall begins snoring upright, and gradually the conversations drift toward older things. Graveyard things. It always happens eventually once enough ale appears. A tanner swears he once saw blue lights wandering among graves during winter fog. Marta insists marsh vapours explain the phenomenon perfectly well, though she also carries protective herbs in her sleeves just in case. A fisherman claims bells sometimes ring beneath the earth during storms. Rubbish, says Odo. The fisherman shrugs. Maybe, but my cousin heard them. Your cousin hears soup boiling and thinks angels arrived. General agreement follows this statement. Still, the stories continue. Some swear ravens gathering atop church towers foretell sickness. Others believe bees must be informed whenever someone dies or the hives grow restless. One woman quietly insists mirrors should remain covered for 9 days after burial, because souls become confused by reflections. Even now, it is hard to tell whether these beliefs truly comfort people or merely give shape to fears already living quietly inside them. You listen while the fire crackles lower. Outside, mist thickens through the lanes. The alehouse door opens suddenly, bringing a gust of cold air and a traveller wrapped in dripping cloaks. He carries a pilgrim staff decorated with tiny lead badges and wears mud nearly to his knees. Everyone glances up automatically. Travellers mean news. Or plague. Occasionally both. The man orders ale immediately, always a promising sign, and settles near the hearth while steam rises from his cloak. Road north flooded, he announces. Groans answer from several merchants. Bridge still standing. Mostly. A concerning word in bridge discussions. The traveller notices you beside Odo. You work the churchyard. Again, apparently this profession becomes visible from orbit. You nod. He studies you for a moment before lowering his voice slightly. Past an old burial field 2 days west from here, he says, Roman stones, strange place. The nearby shepherd leans closer instantly. What sort of strange? The traveller drinks first. No birds. Silence settles briefly around the table. No birds at all, he continues, and bells ringing underground near sunset. Marta rolls her eyes toward the ceiling. Travellers add ghosts to stories because mud alone sounds disappointing. But the traveller only shrugs. Maybe. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The fire burns lower as night deepens. One by one villagers leave for home carrying lanterns into misty darkness. Their lights drift slowly beyond the shutters like wandering stars. Isabel sweeps rushes toward the hearth, while muttering about muddy boots destroying civilization. Father Aldrich departs wrapped tightly against the cold. Marta follows shortly after, pressing another small herb pouch into your hand. For sleep, she says. What does it do? Smells pleasant. Sometimes that's enough. Fair reasoning, honestly. At last you and Odo step back into the night. Cold greets you immediately. Mist hangs thick between buildings while torchlight glows dimly along the church road. Somewhere a dog barks once, then falls silent. Your breath drifts pale beneath the moon hidden beyond clouds. The churchyard appears ahead through fog. Crooked stones. Dark yew branches. The leaning bell tower watching quietly above everything. You pause briefly beside the gate. Rainwater drips softly from the ash tree. Fresh graves lie dark beneath thin mist. And somewhere inside the deep stillness surrounding the churchyard, you begin sensing the strange balance of this life more clearly now, warmth beside cold, laughter beside burial, ale beside prayer, the living gathered close against long winter darkness, while the dead sleep patiently beneath wet earth and bells. The mist lingers for 3 days. Not thick enough to stop travel entirely, but enough to soften the edges of the world until the valley seems half finished, as though God became distracted midway through painting it. Trees emerge suddenly from whiteness. Lanterns glow like floating embers along muddy roads. Even the church bell sounds farther away than usual, muffled beneath layers of damp air. On the 3rd morning, Father Aldrich sends you toward the abbey. A message for the cellarer. he explains while wrapping a parchment carefully inside wax cloth, and perhaps collect the winter candles if the brothers finally stopped arguing over inventory. Apparently monks also enjoy paperwork disputes. You leave shortly after dawn with a walking staff, a wool cloak still faintly smelling of smoke from the alehouse hearth, and a satchel containing coarse bread, dried apples, and a wedge of cheese hard enough to survive military siege conditions. The road north winds beyond the village through frost-covered fields where sheep huddle together like irritated clouds. Bare hedges line the path. Water gathers in wagon ruts frozen silver beneath morning mist. Behind you, the church bell rings once through the fog while smoke curls upward from cottages slowly waking to another cold day. Travel in winter feels strangely quiet. No buzzing insects. Few birds, only boots against mud, distant cartwheels, and the endless soft whisper of wind through dead grass. You pass roadside shrines every few miles, little stone alcoves containing painted saints darkened by weather and candle smoke. Travellers leave offerings there before difficult journeys. Coins sometimes, tiny wax figures, bundles of herbs tied with ribbon. One shrine holds 3 onions and what appears to be half a fish. Faith takes many forms. A pilgrim catches up with you near the old mill bridge shortly after sunrise. He wears patched grey wool and carries enough badges upon his cloak to rattle faintly while walking. Canterbury, Santiago, Rome, shrines you do not recognise. His beard contains crumbs from at least 2 separate meals. Abbey Road, he asks. You nod. Together you continue through the mist while frost crunches beneath your boots. The pilgrim introduces himself as Martin, though quickly admits this may not technically be his birth name anymore. Pilgrimage changes things, he says mysteriously. You suspect it mostly changes foot odour. Still, he proves good company along the cold road. Pilgrims carry stories the way merchants carry bolts of cloth. Every village, every shrine, every roadside inn adds another tale. Martin speaks of mountain monasteries where bells ring through snowstorms all winter long, of relics displayed beneath crystal, of coastal towns where fishermen hang tiny carved ships inside chapels for protection at sea. Some swear certain monasteries preserve dragon bones beneath their crypts. Others claim monks quietly manufacture miracles whenever donations fall too low. No one can quite agree. By midday the road enters woodland. Bare oak branches stretch overhead, dripping moisture from the lingering fog. Moss coats fallen logs. The smell changes here from wet fields to damp leaves and cold earth. Somewhere deeper among the trees, crows argue noisily about something of enormous importance to crows alone. The abbey bell reaches you faintly at last. Low, steady, ancient-sounding. Martin crosses himself immediately. Pilgrims become deeply emotional around bells, perhaps because bells promise shelter, warmth, and soup, which honestly feels reasonable. You emerge from the forest near afternoon and finally glimpse the abbey through drifting mist. It rises from the hillside like part of the stone itself. Grey walls, tall narrow windows, gardens sleeping beneath frost, thin smoke drifting from chimneys above slate roofs. The bell tower stands highest of all, disappearing partly into the fog while its deep bronze voice rolls across the valley below. Even from a distance the place feels ordered, measured, every path swept, every stone positioned carefully. Unlike villages, monasteries attempt to persuade the world into behaving sensibly through schedules and prayer. Mixed results overall. You cross a narrow bridge toward the gatehouse where 2 lay brothers in heavy cloaks inspect travellers before entry. One records names in a ledger despite the damp cold turning ink sluggish. Purpose, he asks. Message from Father Aldrich. any illness, only general winter misery. He nods sympathetically. Apparently acceptable. Inside the abbey walls, the air smells wonderfully of wood smoke, bread ovens, beeswax, and brewing ale. Monks move quietly across the courtyards carrying baskets, lanterns, bundles of parchment, and armfuls of firewood. Their sandals slap softly against wet stone. A novice leads you toward the guest house while reciting rules so quickly you suspect he memorized them while terrified. No shouting, no gambling, no entering restricted libraries, no feeding kitchen scraps to abbey geese because apparently someone once made this mistake catastrophically. The guest house itself feels astonishingly comfortable compared to the graveyard shed. Thick blankets, dry rushes, actual mattresses rather than loosely organised straw pretending to be bedding. A fire burns steadily beneath a stone hearth, while several travellers warm themselves nearby. You nearly weep with gratitude. Martin settles immediately beside the fire and begins removing layers of damp wool with the seriousness of a man unpacking military equipment. A monk brings bowls of lentil stew and dark bread shortly afterward. You eat while steam curls upward into the rafters overhead. Nearby, two merchants quietly discuss flooded roads and bridge tolls. A nun travelling south reads prayers beside the window with lips moving silently. Outside, the abbey bells continue marking time. Always bells, morning bells, meal bells, prayer bells, work bells, sleep bells. Monasteries truly do not trust people to remember anything independently. Later, after warming yourself properly for the first time in days, you deliver Father Aldrich's message to the cellarer, a broad monk named Brother Petrus, whose belt contains more keys than some castle wardens. Iron keys jingle constantly as he walks. The cellarer smells strongly of wax and onions. Candles he grumbles while searching shelves stacked with records. Yes, yes, Father Aldrich complains every winter. He leads you through long stone corridors lined with barrels, sacks of grain, dried herbs hanging from beams, and endless shelves of supplies. Monasteries survive winter through preparation bordering on obsession. Salted fish, honey jars, alacasques, turnips, beans, medicinal herbs bundled carefully in twine. You pass a scriptorium where monks bend silently over parchment beneath candlelight, their fingers stained black with ink. The scratching sound of quills fills the room like tiny insects. One monk sneezes violently and nearly ruins an illuminated page. Another closes his eyes in visible despair. Even now, it's hard to tell whether monasteries produce holiness or simply very organised exhaustion. Brother Petrus finally hands over a crate of beeswax candles along with a smaller pouch. For the churchyard workers, he says quietly. Inside are dried lavender and mint leaves. Helps with the smell come spring. A thoughtful gift, or deeply ominous foreshadowing. Evening settles early across the abbey. Mist presses against stained glass while the bells ring for Compline, the final prayers before sleep. Monks move like shadows through torchlit corridors. Somewhere nearby, wind brushes softly against the cloister arches. You stand briefly beneath a covered walkway overlooking the silent courtyard. Frost gathers pale upon the stones. Candlelight flickers behind narrow windows. And for a moment, surrounded by bells and drifting smoke and ancient stone warmed against winter darkness, the whole medieval world feels quieter somehow, breathing slowly beneath mist and prayer. You remain at the abbey through the following morning because the fog thickens overnight until even the monks admit travel would be foolish. This is considered remarkable. Monks generally treat discomfort as a useful hobby. At dawn, the bells pull you from sleep before the sky has properly decided whether to become morning at all. Their deep sound rolls through the cloisters and guest-house walls, steady and solemn beneath the drifting mist outside. You lie beneath heavy wool blankets, listening to footsteps moving along corridors, distant doors opening, faint prayers rising somewhere beyond the stone. For a moment, you almost forget the churchyard entirely. Then your shoulders ache from digging, and memory returns immediately. The guest-house fire has burned low by the time you dress. Frost traces silver patterns along the narrow window shutters. Nearby, Martin the Pilgrim still sleeps wrapped in blankets and snores with the determined rhythm of a man fighting demons in his dreams. Or perhaps turnips. Hard to say. You step outside into the abbey courtyard where mist hangs thick between the arches. Monks cross silently through the whiteness, carrying lanterns that glow gold against the grey morning. Water drips steadily from roof gutters. Somewhere unseen, ravens call from the outer walls. Brother Petrus finds you near the kitchens carrying a ring of keys large enough to anchor ships. Since the road remains useless, he says, you can help the charnel brothers. You are not entirely sure what this means. Then he leads you toward the far side of the abbey grounds. The charnel house stands beyond the cemetery wall beneath a steep slate roof darkened by age and rain. Smaller than the church but older looking somehow. Narrow windows sit high in the stone walls. Moss covers much of the lower foundation. A wooden cross above the door leans slightly sideways as though exhausted. The smell reaches you first. Not foul exactly. Dry. Dusty. Earthy. Like old wood, cold stone, and centuries quietly settling together. Brother Petrus pushes open the heavy oak door. Inside. Candlelight flickers softly against rows of stacked bones arranged carefully along stone shelves. Skulls, femurs, ribs, thousands of them resting in ordered silence beneath the rafters. You stop walking immediately. Overflow, Petrus explains casually, as though discussing turnip storage. Churchyards eventually fill. Old graves are reopened after years pass. Bones gathered respectfully, then moved into charnel houses so new burials may continue. Medieval death is practical that way. Land is limited, winters are long, villages persist. Still, standing among so many silent remains unsettles something deep inside you. Candles burn beside painted saints along the walls. Tiny scraps of prayer parchment rest beneath certain skulls. Someone has placed dried lavender between stacked ribs nearby. The dead here are not forgotten exactly. Merely reorganized. Two elderly monks work quietly within the chamber, sorting old burial remains recovered, after recent rains exposed part of the cemetery slope. One brushes mud gently from a skull using cloth. The other records markings in a ledger, while squinting through spectacles thick as river glass. Flooding loosened older graves, Brother Petrus explains, need everything ordered properly before spring. You nod slowly. The monk with the spectacles peers up at you. Mind the shelves, he says. Brother Lucian knocked over 3 generations during Lent. Apparently this remains memorable. You spend the morning helping move small bone crates from the cemetery edge into the charnel house, while bells echo faintly through the abbey mist. The work feels strangely delicate compared to grave digging. Less force, more care. The bones themselves appear lighter than expected. Fragile almost. Like dry branches wrapped in centuries. One skull bears a deep crack across the crown. Another still holds several teeth. Tiny fragments of burial cloth cling to certain bones darkened by age and damp soil. No names remain attached to most of them. No stories either. Only the quiet evidence that they once laughed, walked roads, carried water, prayed beside fires, worried about harvests, loved someone, feared winter. then became silence beneath the earth. A monk named Brother Anselm works beside you, sorting recovered bones into linen-lined baskets. His hands move gently despite the cold. "Some visitors fear this place," he says softly. Reasonable, honestly, but they should not. The charnel house reminds the living to stay humble. You glance around the dim chamber. Rows upon rows of silent faces stare outward from shadow. Yes, you admit, it certainly does that. Brother Anselm smiles faintly. Besides, bones are patient company. Not comforting words exactly. Still, the atmosphere here feels less frightening than strangely peaceful. Candles glow steadily against old stone. Rain taps faintly above the roof. Incense lingers softly beneath the scent of dust and earth. Outside, bells continue marking the hours one by one. Time passing. Always passing. During midday meal, the monks serve cabbage stew with black bread and watered ale in the refectory hall. Conversation remains mostly forbidden, except for one brother reading scripture aloud while everyone eats. Several monks nevertheless manage to communicate entire complaints through sighing alone. An impressive skill. Afterward, Brother Anselm shows you a narrow side chamber beneath the charnel roof where old burial relics are stored, rusted pilgrim badges found in graves, cracked rosaries, tiny wooden crosses, rings too worn to identify. One shelf contains little clay jars filled with cemetery soil gathered during plague years generations earlier. "For remembrance," Anselm says quietly. You stare at the jars. Some swear earth from plague burials protects against future sickness if carried carefully in small pouches. Others think merely touching such soil invites terrible luck. Even now, it is hard to tell whether fear preserves these customs or whether memory itself refuses to disappear completely. Rain begins again lightly by afternoon. Mist presses against the high windows while candles flicker in the dimness. You help close wooden ossuary boxes beneath the shelves, while Brother Lucian, apparently infamous for collapsing historical ancestors during Lent, carefully copies burial dates into records. His handwriting resembles frightened spiders. Outside, abbey bells ring for none. The sound enters the charnel house softly, echoing among the bones. And suddenly you understand something strange. The graveyard back home still belongs partly to the living. Villagers pass through, dogs wander paths, children dare each other near stones, merchants cross nearby roads. But here, inside the charnel house, the dead possess their own quiet order entirely separate from the world beyond the walls. No wind, no muddy carts, only candlelight and patience. As evening approaches, Brother Petrus announces the roads may clear by morning. You prepare the candle crates for travel near the guest house door while monks light lanterns against the growing dark. Before sleep, you return once more to the charnel house alone. Just briefly. Candles burn low beside the stacked bones. Shadows gather softly beneath the rafters overhead. Rain whispers faintly outside beyond the stone walls. You stand listening to the silence. No ghosts, no whispers, only stillness layered deep as earth itself. And somewhere beyond the abbey mist, beyond the bells and forests and muddy roads, the little churchyard waits again for its gravedigger to return. The road back to the village clears enough for travel the next morning, though clear in medieval winter mostly means the mud has agreed not to swallow horses whole for at least several hours. Brother Petrus loads the candle crates onto a small handcart shortly after dawn, while mist drifts low across the abbey yard. Frost clings silver to the cloister arches. Monks move through the cold, carrying lanterns and bundles of firewood, while the bells toll prime above them all, slow and patient in the pale grey light. Before you leave, Brother Anselm presses a tiny sprig of dried lavender into your hand. For the churchyard shed, he says, improves the smell. You thank him sincerely. Then he pauses, and perhaps discourages spirits. You blink. I thought monks disliked superstition. We do, he replies calmly, but lavender smells pleasant either way. Fair enough. Martin the Pilgrim continues farther south toward another shrine road, rattling faintly beneath all his pilgrim badges as he disappears into the fog. You watch him vanish among bare hedges and muddy tracks, becoming slowly another wandering shape swallowed by the medieval world. Then you begin the journey home. The cart wheels groan constantly through wet ruts. Ravens follow overhead from tree to tree with the unsettling confidence of creatures who know graveyards employ steady labour year-round. The forest road smells of damp bark and cold leaves, somewhere unseen. Water drips steadily from branches into swollen ditches. Travel alone feels slower somehow. Quieter too. You hear more small things. Your boots against mud. The creak of the cart handle. Wind brushing dead grass beyond the roadside shrines. Far away, faint bells from the abbey slowly fading behind you. By midday, the village church tower finally appears through the mist above the valley, leaning slightly as always against the winter sky. Smoke rises from cottages below. The familiar road curves beside frozen fields toward the market square where only a few traders remain after market day. Home in a strange way, or at least the closest thing to it presently involving graves and damp straw. You arrive just as the noon bell rings. Father Aldrich waits near the church porch speaking with two villagers wrapped heavily against the cold. Odo stands nearby holding a shovel like a man prepared to physically threaten winter itself. When he sees the candle crates, he grunts approvingly. Good. Nearly buried old martyr last week by lantern grease. A sentence you wisely choose not to investigate. Father Aldrich helps unload supplies while the villagers linger awkwardly beside the church steps. One is the miller, broad-shouldered and red-faced from cold. The other is a thin woman clutching her cloak tightly beneath her chin. They stop speaking when you approach. Never a promising sign. The priest sighs softly. There's been a complaint. He says, "Of course there has." The medieval world survives largely through complaints. Fence complaints, goat complaints, tax complaints, burial complaints, apparently. The miller gestures sharply toward the far end of the churchyard. New graves crossing the old boundary stones, he mutters. Too close to my family plots. The woman immediately objects. There's room enough still. Not if gravediggers keep digging crooked. You glance toward Odo. Odo looks genuinely offended, which on his face resembles a disappointed walrus. I've dug straighter graves than you've milled flour, he snaps. This does not calm matters. Soon everyone speaks at once while cold wind rattles dead branches overhead. The miller insists newer burials encroach upon older family markers near the yew trees. The woman claims poor villagers deserve proper resting ground as much as wealthy families. Odo complains about rainwashing markers sideways. Father Aldrich attempts peace with the exhausted expression of a man who spends most days negotiating between mud and human stubbornness. You begin understanding why monasteries enjoy silence rules. At last the priest raises one hand. Enough. The manor court settles boundary disputes tomorrow. Everyone groans immediately. Manor courts rarely improve anything quickly. Mostly they gather villagers into cold rooms where officials ask endless questions, while scribes record every sentence in handwriting, impossible for future generations to decipher. Still, the dispute remains unresolved. And unfortunately, graveyards possess limited space, especially after hard winters. The rest of the afternoon passes repairing damage from the recent rains. Part of the outer wall collapsed near the pauper graves, leaving stones scattered into muddy grass. You and Odo work beneath weak sunlight rebuilding the section, while crows watch critically from the bell tower. Village always argues during winter, Odo mutters while lifting stones. Cold makes people remember old grudges. Perhaps true. Cold sharpens everything somehow. Hunger, weariness, fear. Even church bells sound lonelier in winter. While working, you notice fresh ribbons tied near several grave markers, tiny cloth strips fluttering in the wind. For remembrance, you ask. Odo shrugs. Or protection. Some families tie coloured cloth near graves during winter, believing wandering souls follow familiar colours home during holy feast nights. Others think ribbons keep evil from settling upon burial grounds. One widow apparently changes ribbon colours according to moon phases after advice from a travelling herbal woman, widely considered either gifted or completely insane. Possibly both. By sunset, the repaired wall stands reasonably firm again despite mud constantly trying to reclaim it. Smoke thickens across the valley. Frost begins forming once more along the stones. Somewhere down the road, children shout while chasing each other through dying daylight. Then the Manor Eve arrives. Naturally. He rides a shaggy horse with the weary posture of a man employed primarily to listen to village problems nobody else wants. His cloak smells strongly of wet leather and horse sweat. Court tomorrow morning, he announces while dismounting stiffly. Boundary matter, burial fees too. More groaning follows. Apparently someone also disputes recent funeral payments. The cooper's brother believes the church overcharged for grave candles. Meanwhile, the fishmongers claim pauper burials deserve reduced fees during flood season because wet ground already does half the work. This argument sounds deeply unwise near gravediggers holding shovels. The Reeve notices you quietly. You'll attend, he says. You blink. Why, witness? An unfortunate medieval word. That evening, the alehouse fills again with villagers discussing tomorrow's court by the hearth, while snow threatens faintly beyond the shutters. The blacksmith argues boundary stones moved naturally during rains. Marta insists half the village cannot distinguish one grave from another after dusk anyway. Father Aldrich drinks ale silently beside the fire, looking profoundly tired. No one fights harder than villagers protecting dead relatives, he murmurs eventually. Across the room, the miller and fishmongers already glare at one another over cups. You warm your hands beside the flames while the familiar smell of smoke, wet wool, onions, and spilled ale settles around you once more. Outside, the bells ring softly across the dark valley, and somewhere beyond the misty windows, beneath ribbons and frost and crooked stones, the churchyard waits quietly for tomorrow's arguments about the living, the dead, and how much earth belongs to each. Snow arrives during the night. Not deep snow yet, only a thin white covering across rooftops, frozen fields, and grave markers, but enough to transform the village by morning into something quieter and strangely gentler. The churchyard stones wear pale crowns of frost. Wagon ruts vanish beneath powdery drifts. Smoke rises straight upward into still air while the bells ring through the cold so clearly you feel them in your chest. You wake shivering beneath blankets in the shed and discover the water bucket beside the wall frozen solid. A deeply discouraging start to the day. Outside, Odo stands near the ash tree, stamping warmth into his boots while breath clouds around his beard like chimney smoke. Ground hardening, he says grimly. You look toward the graves. Snow softens their edges. The older mounds nearly disappear beneath white frost, while the newest burials remain dark patches against the pale earth. The ribbons tied near several markers flutter stiffly in the cold wind. Today, before the manor court begins, Father Aldrich sends you and Odo to inspect the winter stores beneath the church granary. Apparently, grave diggers become useful whenever lifting, hauling, digging, repairing, or enduring misery is involved. A broad category overall. The storage cellar sits beneath a timber building near the market lane where villagers keep emergency grain reserves against harsh winters. Thick oak doors grown open beneath layers of frost. Inside, the air smells dry and dusty compared to the wet, cold outdoors barley sacks, onions hanging from rafters, smoked fish, apples stored in straw, wax, old wood. Winter survival lives in rooms like this. You help move sacks while the reeve records inventory beside a lantern. Grain levels, salt stores, dried peas, honey casks, bundles of medicinal herbs wrapped carefully in cloth. Every item matters. A poor harvest or hard winter can hollow villages quietly long before spring arrives. Abby predicts heavy snow, the reeve mutters while marking figures onto parchment. How? Birds migrating early. Odo snorts. And old Marta's knees. The reeve nods seriously. Apparently this remains accepted science. Nearby, women inspect wool blankets stored for poorer villagers during deep winter. Children carry kindling bundles between buildings with red noses and numb fingers. The baker unloads dark loaves onto market tables, while steam curls warmly into the freezing air. Life slows during winter but never stops. It simply draws closer to fires. By mid-morning, the manor court gathers inside the village hall beside the square. Snow melts from boots into muddy puddles across the rush-covered floor, while villagers crowd onto benches beneath smoky rafters. Candles flicker beside narrow windows fogged with frost. At the far table sits the manor steward wrapped in fur collars, thick enough to survive northern warfare. Beside him, a scribe prepares ink and parchment with visible despair already settling across his face. He clearly expects long arguments. Correctly. The burial dispute begins almost immediately. The miller claims newer graves shifted beyond proper boundary stones after autumn rains. The fishmongers insist poor families deserve equal burial ground near the church walls. Someone mentions unpaid candle fees. Someone else accuses goats of knocking markers sideways. Honestly, the goats may indeed be involved. You stand beside Odo near the rear wall while villagers argue in increasingly circular patterns. The steward rubs his forehead constantly. Father Aldrich attempts diplomacy. The churchyard belongs to all souls equally. Yes, snaps the miller, but some souls should remain properly organised. This statement somehow creates more confusion. Eventually the steward calls you forward as witness regarding recent graves. You step carefully through the crowded hall while snow taps softly against the shutters outside. The scribe dips his quill dramatically as though preparing royal history rather than complaints about muddy boundaries. Have burial markers shifted recently, the steward asks. You consider honestly. Yes. The miller looks triumphant. Due to rain, you continue, and frost, and perhaps children climbing walls. Several villagers glance suspiciously toward a row of boys near the door. One immediately pretends innocence so aggressively he becomes the obvious culprit. Odo confirms much the same. Graves settle naturally over time, stones lean, wooden markers rot, earth shifts after storms. The churchyard changes slowly year after year beneath weather and seasons alike. Even now, it is hard to tell precisely where some older graves begin or end anymore. The steward sighs heavily. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of testimony, interruptions, muttering, and one brief shouting match involving turnip theft from 6 winters earlier somehow resurfacing unexpectedly, the manor court reaches a compromise. New boundary markers will be placed near the yew trees come spring. poor burials remain permitted throughout the churchyard. And children caught climbing grave markers must assist Odo with maintenance work. The boys look horrified. Odo looks delighted. Court ends shortly after noon. Villagers spill back into the snowy square, still debating outcomes beneath drifting chimney smoke. The bells ring overhead through cold blue light while merchants wrap cloaks tighter against the wind. Father Aldrich walks beside you toward the churchyard, carrying his gloves beneath one arm. Peace rarely lasts long, he says. About graves. About anything. Fair point. The afternoon passes quietly afterward. Snow deepens slowly across the valley while you help repair loose boards near the tool shed roof before heavier weather arrives. Ravens hop across the graveyard wall, leaving tiny tracks behind them. Somewhere distant, wolves howl faintly beyond the frozen woods. Or perhaps only dogs again. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. Toward evening, Marta visits carrying bundles of dried herbs for winter sickness. Remedies thyme, mint, rosemary, willow bark. She hangs several bunches inside the shed near your bedding. Air grows foul in cold weather, she explains. Herbs help. Scientifically. She shrugs. Pleasant smells improve morale. A surprisingly modern conclusion. Still, the shed immediately feels warmer somehow beneath the scent of mint and rosemary mixing with wood smoke and damp wool. Night falls early beneath gathering snow clouds. The church bell rings compline across the frozen valley, while candlelight glows softly behind cottage shutters. Villagers retreat indoors. Fires crackle beneath chimneys. Roads vanish beneath fresh white drifts. You stand briefly near the ash tree before sleep. The churchyard stretches silent around you beneath snow. Crooked stones. White-covered graves. Dark yew branches against the winter sky. Fresh burials and ancient bones resting together beneath the same cold earth. And as frost settles quietly over the village once more, you feel the slow turning rhythm of medieval winter drawing everyone inward toward fires, toward shelter, toward memory. While beyond the walls the long season deepens one bell at a time. The snow keeps falling for 4 more days. Not constantly, but in soft wandering bursts that drift across the valley at odd hours, covering roads, roofs, and graves alike until the entire village seems wrapped beneath layers of wool. Paths narrow, wagon wheels freeze stiff overnight, chimneys smoke endlessly against pale skies while every sound grows softer under the snow. Even the bells change. Their voices seem rounder somehow in winter air, less sharp, as though the cold itself cushions the sound before sending it rolling through the valley. You spend most mornings clearing paths through the churchyard with Odo before villagers arrive for prayers. Snow gathers heavily atop grave markers and drifts against the church wall nearly to your knees. The ash tree stands black and bare against white ground, while ravens leave claw marks around the newer graves searching for scraps. Odo hates the ravens passionately. They know things, he mutters darkly. You're fairly certain the ravens mostly know where food is. Still, the birds watch the graveyard with unsettling patience. The village grows quieter during heavy snow. Market days shrink smaller. Travellers become rare. Smoke and lantern light replace movement. Families remain indoors mending nets, spinning wool, repairing tools, or simply surviving winter one bowl of pottage at a time. But the churchyard never fully rests. Today Father Aldrich asks you to keep night watch. Not because of spirits. Probably. Several grave markers near the outer wall have been disturbed recently. Footprints appeared after midnight near the newer burials. One wooden cross vanished entirely. The Reeve suspects thieves searching for jewellery buried with the dead. Marta suspects wandering drunkards. Odo suspects both plus ravens. Stay near the lantern, Father Aldrich advises as dusk settles over the snow, and if you hear singing after midnight, ignore it. You pause. What sort of singing? The priest pulls his cloak tighter against the wind. That's the safest approach. Wonderfully reassuring. By evening, the valley lies silent beneath fresh snow. Thin smoke drifts upward from cottage chimneys, while candlelight glows warmly behind shutter cracks. The church bell rings Compline one final time before darkness fully settles over the village. Then stillness arrives. Real stillness. The kind only winter creates. You bundle yourself heavily in wool and fur before taking position beneath the church porch with a lantern, a shovel, and a blanket thick enough to smother small livestock. Snow creaks beneath your boots while cold air bites instantly at your face. The graveyard stretches pale beneath moonlight. Rows of white-covered stones. Dark yew branches swaying softly overhead. Thin frost glittering along the wall. At first the watch feels almost peaceful. You pace slowly between the paths while the lantern glows gold against the snow. Your breath drifts pale in front of you. Somewhere far beyond the fields, wolves howl faintly through the frozen dark. Or dogs, possibly ambitious geese. Hard to say anymore. The village itself sleeps quietly beyond the churchyard wall. Occasionally a shutter creaks in the wind. Once, you hear distant laughter from the alehouse before silence swallows it again. Snow continues drifting gently from the clouds in slow silver flakes. You begin understanding why winter nights create so many ghost stories. Everything feels farther away. Even familiar places seem uncertain beneath moonlight and snow. Near midnight, you stop beside the pauper graves at the outer wall where frost gathers thick across the wooden markers. The snow there remains strangely uneven, disturbed by footprints half covered from earlier weather. Human footprints, fresh enough to notice. You raise the lantern higher. The tracks lead toward the older yew trees near the rear boundary stones before disappearing into drifting snow. Your grip tightens around the shovel handle automatically. The wind moves softly through the branches overhead. Nothing else. You wait. The church bell remains silent now between prayer hours. Clouds drift slowly across the moon. Somewhere nearby, water drips beneath ice with tiny hollow sounds. Then you hear it. Not singing exactly, more like humming. Faint, low, carried briefly through the wind. You freeze beside the graves listening carefully. Again the sound comes, drifting somewhere beyond the yew trees near the far wall. A human voice. Probably. Your boots crunch through snow as you move cautiously toward it. Lantern light swings across crooked stones and buried mounds. Shadows stretch long beneath the trees. The humming stops immediately. Of course it does. You stand very still. Nothing moves except falling snow. Then suddenly a shape darts from behind the yew trunk and bolts toward the outer gate. You nearly drop the lantern. Or you shout instinctively. The figure slips in snow, curses loudly in entirely human fashion, and collapses beside a grave marker. Not a ghost then. Merely a boy. One of the miller's sons, perhaps 12 years old, wrapped badly in a stolen cloak and carrying something hidden beneath his arm. You drag him gently upright while he trembles more from embarrassment than cold. What are you doing here? He lowers his head. After considerable stammering, the truth emerges. The missing grave marker? He took it. Not for witchcraft or grave robbing or sinister midnight rituals. For firewood. His family's fuel stores ran low after the heavy snow. He thought nobody would notice one old cross from the pauper graves. You stare at him while snow drifts softly around the churchyard. The boy begins crying quietly. Not dramatic crying. just exhausted winter crying. The sort villagers do when cold and hunger finally wear holes through pride. You sigh heavily and guide him toward the porch lantern. Inside the church, Father Eldrick wakes quickly when summoned. Odo arrives moments later, looking ready to battle demons personally until he sees the terrified boy clutching the stolen marker. Silence follows. Then Father Aldrich kneels beside the child. "Did your mother send you?" The boy shakes his head violently. "She doesn't know." Another pause. Outside, snow taps softly against the windows while the graveyard waits pale beneath moonlight. Finally the priest stands. "Return the marker tomorrow," he says quietly. "Then help repair the wall for a week." The boy nods instantly through tears. Odo grumbles something about ravens still being suspicious regardless. No one disagrees. Later, after the boy leaves wrapped in spare blankets and carrying actual firewood from the church stores, you step outside once more beneath the falling snow. The churchyard lies silent again. Still, cold, peaceful beneath the drifting white darkness. You stand listening to the wind moving through the yew branches while distant bells from the abbey ring faintly across the sleeping valley. And slowly, beneath the lantern glow and winter sky, you begin understanding how closely hardship and kindness live together in places like this, separated sometimes only by a single cold night and an empty firewood stack. Morning comes pale and brittle after the long night watch. Snow still covers the valley, though the sky clears at last into a cold blue brightness that makes every rooftop, fence post, and grave marker gleam sharply beneath the winter sun. Frost hangs from the church eaves like tiny crystal knives. Smoke rises clean and straight upward from chimneys while the bells ring across the frozen air bright enough to wake even the laziest monk. You feel every hour of missed sleep immediately. Your joints ache, your boots remain damp despite drying beside the hearth, and somewhere deep inside your spine, winter itself appears to have settled permanently. Odo claims this sensation never leaves once grave digging becomes your profession. Encouraging news overall. The miller's son arrives shortly after dawn, carrying the stolen grave marker across both arms. His ears glow red from cold and embarrassment alike. Behind him walks his mother wrapped tightly in a patched wool cloak, her expression somewhere between fury and exhaustion. Father Aldrich meets them beside the porch. The woman apologizes before the boy can speak. "He thought we'd freeze," she says quietly. No one answers immediately because winter makes many desperate ideas sound reasonable. The grave marker itself proves older than expected, weather softened nearly smooth by years of rain and snow. Odo examines it critically while muttering about children raised without respect for proper graveyard conduct. Then, after a moment, he hands the boy a shovel. "If you steal from the dead," he says, "you repair what the living neglect." Thus begins the morning. Together you and the boy carry stones toward the damaged outer wall where frost cracked mortar during the recent storms. Snow crunches beneath your boots. Ravens watch from the bell tower with their usual air of professional judgment. The child works silently at first, clearly expecting constant punishment. Instead, Odo teaches him how to set foundation stones properly against shifting ground. "Winter pushes walls apart," the old sexton explains. "Spring mud swallows the weak parts. Build for both." Honestly, it sounds less like masonry and more like philosophy. By midday, the churchyard paths begin filling again as villagers emerge cautiously after days of heavy snow. Women carry baskets toward the market lane. A shepherd drives thin sheep through the frost-covered road, while muttering prayers against wolves. Children throw snow at each other beside the well until an elderly widow threatens them all with a broom. Normal village life returning slowly. Then the broken cart arrives. You hear it before seeing it. Wood creaking. a horse snorting angrily. One wheel striking frozen ruts with increasingly tragic noises. The cart limps through the village gate shortly after noon, trailing one shattered wheel rim and enough rope repairs to qualify as engineering through stubbornness alone. Two traders walk beside it, wrapped in travel-stained cloaks white with road salt and frost. The horse looks personally betrayed by existence. They stop near the churchyard wall while villagers gather almost immediately because nothing attracts medieval attention faster than damaged equipment and possible gossip. The older trader removes his gloves with visible pain. Wheel broke near the forest road, he explains. Needs shelter before dark. Father Aldrich nods toward the stable sheds while Marta immediately begins inspecting the travellers for signs of sickness from a suspiciously close distance. Any coughing? No. Rash? No. Visions? The trader blinks. No. Good enough. Travellers carry danger during winter, illness especially. Villages become cautious once roads freeze and supplies run thin. Still, hospitality matters too. The Abbey guest house taught you that much. You help guide the damaged cart towards shelter beside the granary while snow melts slowly from the axles. The cargo beneath canvas wrappings proves mostly harmless wool cloth, lamp oil, iron nails, dried figs from southern markets, and tiny painted icons destined for roadside shrines farther north. One crate rattles oddly. What's in that? The younger trader grins tiredly. Glass mirrors. Several nearby villagers immediately cross themselves. Mirrors make people nervous here. Some believe reflections confuse wandering souls. Others insist mirrors trap pieces of human spirit inside the glass. A shepherd once claimed his cousin disappeared entirely after staring into polished silver during a thunderstorm, though this story loses credibility slightly because the cousin later turned up drunk in another county. Even now, it is hard to tell where superstition ends and entertainment begins. The younger trader notices the churchyard beyond the wall. Busy winter, he asks. You glance toward the graves. Enough. He nods quietly. Travellers understand that answer. While the blacksmith examines the broken wheel, villagers gather around the cart discussing road conditions beyond the valley. Flooded bridges, snowed-in passes, bandits near the northern woods. One woman swears wolves followed a merchant caravan for 3 straight nights during the last storm. Odo listens carefully while pretending not to. Road safe to the Abbey? Father Aldrich asks. The older trader hesitates. Mostly. There is that word again. Apparently medieval travel survives entirely on mostly. By late afternoon, the blacksmith and both traders begin repairing the wheel beside the churchyard gate. Hammer blows rings sharply through the cold air while sparks leap bright against the snow. Children gather nearby to watch. So does the miller's son after finishing wall repairs, though Odo keeps assigning him increasingly unnecessary tasks whenever he slows down. Character building, apparently. You spend part of the afternoon clearing snow from newer graves before another freeze arrives overnight. The work feels strangely peaceful beneath the pale winter light. Your shovel scrapes softly against frozen earth, while smoke drifts from chimneys across the valley. The pauper woman's grave near the outer wall lies almost entirely beneath snow now, except for the crooked marker rising dark against the white. Nearby, tiny animal tracks cross older burial mounds. Fox, perhaps. Or cats. The church bells ring again through the clear evening air. Slow. Measured. Comforting somehow. As dusk settles, the repaired cart finally stands ready for travel once more. The traders thank the villagers with small gifts, figs for the priest, nails for Odo, a scrap of dyed cloth for Marta, who immediately suspects the dye may contain poison despite accepting it anyway. Before leaving at dawn tomorrow, the younger trader approaches you quietly near the church gate. "You keep good watch here," he says. You glance toward the graves beyond the snow. "Someone should—" He nods thoughtfully. Then, after a pause, "Roads remember people less kindly." You watch the travellers disappear into the stable shelter while evening settles fully over the village. Lanterns glow behind shutters. Frost thickens along the stones. Somewhere far away beyond the woods, wolves howl faintly once more beneath the rising winter moon. And inside the silent churchyard, beneath snow and bells and gathering darkness, the graves wait patiently through another frozen night. The funeral begins at candle hour, that quiet stretch of evening when daylight fades from the valley but full darkness has not yet settled, when smoke hangs blue above the rooftops and the bell sounds softer through the cold air. Snow still lingers along the churchyard edges, though the paths have been cleared into narrow winding tracks between the graves. You spend most of the afternoon preparing. Not grand preparations exactly. Medieval funerals rarely become grand unless kings, bishops, or exceptionally argumentative nobles are involved. Mostly there is hauling, sweeping, candle trimming, warming stiff fingers, and trying not to slip into open graves while carrying things that would deeply upset grieving relatives. Tonight's burial belongs to old Harlan, the beekeeper. Nearly everyone in the village knew him. He kept hives beside the southern orchards and spoke to his bees as though they're difficult neighbours rather than insects. Marta once claimed he trusted honey more than physicians. Judging by most physicians of the era, honestly, not unreasonable. He died quietly 2 nights earlier in his sleep beside the hearth, after several winters of failing strength. Father Aldrich calls it a merciful passing. Odo calls it fortunate timing because frozen ground grows crueler each week. You spent the morning cutting through frost-hardened earth beneath the yew trees while ravens observe from above like impatient supervisors. The grave now waits beneath a thin dusting of snow near the older stones, where Harlan requested burial years ago beside his wife. People speak casually about burial wishes here. Not morbidly, just practically. As common as discussing grain storage or roof leaks. Towards sunset, villagers begin arriving through the lich gate carrying candles protected inside horn lanterns. Tiny warm lights drift through the growing dusk one by one until the churchyard glows softly among the graves. The sight still catches you every time. Beautiful in a quiet way, like stars descending slowly into the snow. Father Aldrich stands near the church porch wrapped in heavy black wool while incense curls faintly around him in the cold. The church doors remain open behind him, candlelight spilling gold across the frosted ground. Inside, monks from the abbey chant softly. Low voices. Slow rhythm. The sound drifts outward into the evening mist until the entire churchyard seems to breathe with it. The villagers gather closely tonight. Harlan was well liked. Children once followed him through summer fields while he checked hives. Travellers bought honey from his stall during market days. Even Odo admits grudging respect because the beekeeper always repaired church candles cheaply during lean winters. No one truly dislikes the candle supplier. Marta approaches carrying a small covered basket. For the grave, she explains quietly. Inside rests a tiny beeswax candle shaped by hand. Some swear candles made from a beekeeper's own hives burn longer during burial rites and guide souls more safely through darkness. Others insist bees themselves carry prayers toward heaven because they move between flowers and sunlight. No one can quite agree. Still, the little candle smells wonderfully of warm honey even in the cold air. The funeral procession emerges from the church slowly. 4 villagers carry the coffin upon wooden poles wrapped with black cloth. Snow crunches beneath their boots while the monks continue chanting behind them. Candle flames flicker in the wind. The bells toll once overhead, deep and heavy against the fading light. You walk beside Odo near the grave, carrying ropes beneath numb fingers. The coffin is simple oak again, but carefully polished. Harlan built part of it himself during autumn, apparently correcting the carpenter's measurements several times while still alive. "Can't trust another man with proper corners," he reportedly said. A surprisingly medieval attitude toward mortality. The villagers gather silently around the grave while frost thickens along the stones nearby. Their candlelight paints warm gold across faces, cloaks, drifting breath. Somewhere beyond the churchyard wall, dogs bark faintly toward the darkening road. Father Aldrich begins the prayers. Smoke from the incense rises pale into the freezing air. The monks answer softly behind him. You lower the coffin carefully while the ropes creak against frozen boards. Snowflakes drift lazily from the dark sky now, though no wind stirs them. The world feels hushed somehow, wrapped in candlelight and winter silence. Then something strange happens. From somewhere beyond the graves, deep near the orchard road, comes the low humming sound of bees. Faint, impossible this late in winter. Several villagers glance toward the darkness immediately. Marta crosses herself. One of the monks stops chanting briefly. The humming fades almost at once back into silence. No one speaks about it directly, but afterward, those gathered near the grave whisper softly among themselves. Some swear Harlan's bees came searching for him. Others claim winter winds merely moved strangely through the orchard hives. Even now, standing there beneath drifting snow and candle smoke, it is hard to tell which explanation feels more believable. Father Aldrich finishes the burial rites while villagers place tiny offerings beside the grave before leaving. A honeycomb fragment wrapped in cloth. A wooden carving of a bee. Sprigs of rosemary. One child leaves half a sweet cake despite obvious internal struggle about surrendering dessert. The grave fills slowly afterward beneath your shovel, and Odo's while candle flames drift away one by one through the churchyard gate. The monks return toward the abbey road carrying lanterns into darkness. Their chanting fades softly across the snowy fields. At last only you, Odo, Father Aldrich, and Marta remain beside the fresh mound. The priest plants a wooden cross carefully into the earth. Snow gathers already along its edges. Marta kneels briefly to place the little beeswax candle atop the grave. Its flame burns low and steady against the winter night. "Bees must be told when their keeper dies," she says quietly. "You remember hearing this before, an old custom carried across many villages. Families whisper news of deaths into beehives so the bees will not abandon them afterward." "Does it truly matter, you ask?" Marta shrugs beneath her cloak. "People matter to bees less than they hope." Surprisingly philosophical for an herbalist. The church bells ring once more for evening prayer. Their sound rolls outward over snow-covered fields and frozen roads, while candle smoke drifts slowly upward into the dark. You finish covering the grave. Fresh earth. White frost. The tiny beeswax flame trembling gently at the centre. Then everyone departs quietly through the churchyard gate until you stand alone for a moment among the stones. The snow falls softer now, almost weightless. Around you the graves stretch silent beneath moonlight and candle glow, while somewhere far beyond the valley another bell answers faintly through the winter dark. And slowly, beneath the drifting snow and fading chants, the whole world seems to settle into stillness once again. Winter deepens after Harlan's burial. Not suddenly. Medieval winters rarely hurry. They settle gradually into the bones of villages, into roof beams, frozen wells, stiff hands wrapped around steaming bowls. The days shorten until dawn itself feels reluctant. Frost clings permanently to shaded stones. Smoke hangs low above the valley morning and night alike. And the churchyard grows quieter beneath the snow. You notice it most at dawn. The graves soften beneath white drifts until older markers nearly disappear completely. Paths narrow between the stones where you and Odo shovel each morning by lantern light before prayers begin. The ash tree stands motionless against pale skies, while ravens huddle silently along the wall, feathers puffed against the cold. Even sound changes in deep winter. Boots crunch sharper. Voices carry farther. The bells seem larger somehow. Today the snow falls again before sunrise. Thick, slow flakes drifting across the churchyard beneath the lantern glow. You wake to Odo kicking the shed door open with all the warmth and tenderness of an invading army. Up, he grunts. Ground froze hard overnight. A deeply unpleasant sentence for grave diggers. You dress beside the little hearth, while rosemary and lavender from martyrs' bundles hang drying overhead. The herbs have nearly masked the smell of damp wool and old straw by now, which feels close to miraculous. Outside, darkness still covers the valley. Only lanterns move through the snow. Tiny wandering lights near cottages and stable sheds where villagers begin another winter day. You and Odo walk the churchyard paths checking markers after the storm. Several wooden crosses lean badly beneath the snow weight. One older stone has cracked clean through the centre from repeated freezing. Everything breaks eventually, Odo mutters while writing a tilted marker. He says this casually. Like weather. By midday, snow blankets the village almost knee-deep in places. Market stalls remain mostly empty except for the baker, the fish seller, and one extremely optimistic man attempting to trade onions during a blizzard. The onions actually sell. Winter lowers standards considerably. Father Aldrich spends much of the afternoon visiting sick villagers, while you continue clearing paths near the newer graves. Your shovel scrapes frozen earth beneath the snow. Breath clouds thick before your face. Somewhere beyond the walls, children laugh while sliding across frozen puddles despite repeated warnings from every adult alive. The miller's son helps now without complaint. Punishment gradually became habit. He carries firewood toward the shed while asking endless questions about older graves. Which is the oldest? No idea. Any knights buried here? Probably. Any ghosts? You glance toward Odo. Only him. The old sexton pretends outrage but secretly enjoys this. The boy points toward a nearly buried stone near the yew trees where only the top edge still rises above the snow. That one has no name. Many do not anymore. Rain, frost, moss, time. The village forgets slowly but thoroughly. You kneel to brush snow from the stone face. Faint carvings emerge beneath your glove part of a cross, worn letters impossible to fully read now. Somewhere beneath the frozen earth rests someone once known completely. A voice. A face. Favourite songs, perhaps. Complaints about weather. Dreams. Then centuries pass, and even their name fades beneath snow. The thought lingers with you quietly. Later that afternoon, Father Aldrich returns carrying a basket of bread from villagers, preparing for St. Agnes Eve tomorrow night. Certain feast days matter deeply during winter, because they interrupt the long, cold weeks with candles, prayers, songs, and enough ale to temporarily convince people life may improve eventually. The priest pauses beside Harlan's grave. Snow nearly covers it now except for the wooden cross and the tiny beeswax candle stub frozen into the earth beside it. Bees survive the cold, he says softly. Marta checked yesterday. You nod. Then the priest adds, she spoke to the hives. Of course she did. Some swear bees carry news between the living and dead during winter nights. Others insist hives abandoned after a beekeeper's death bring terrible luck to entire villages. A shepherd once claimed bees can recognize sorrow by scent alone. though admittedly he also believed turnips cured baldness. Medieval certainty varies greatly. By evening the snowfall thickens harder. Lantern light glows hazy through the storm while villagers hurry indoors before darkness fully settles. The church bells ring through swirling white air, low and distant as though muffled beneath wool blankets. You help Father Aldrich carry extra firewood into the church before night prayers. Inside, warmth gathers softly beneath the stone arches. Candles flicker beside painted saints while incense drifts faintly through the nave. A handful of villagers kneel quietly among the pews. Old women wrapped in shawls. A fisherman with cracked hands. The miller's wife holding her youngest child asleep beneath a wool cloak. Winter draws people toward candlelight, toward company, toward anything warm enough to push back the dark for another evening. After prayers, the priest lingers near the altar while snow taps softly against stained glass. You settle into this work, he says. You glance toward the church doors where frost gathers along the hinges. I'm not sure whether that's good. Father Aldrich smiles faintly. Most useful things are uncomfortable at first. Another bell rings softly overhead. The sound rolls through the rafters like slow breathing. Outside, night has fully claimed the valley by the time you leave the church. Snow drifts high along the paths now. Lanterns glow behind shutter cracks across the village, while smoke pours thick from chimneys into the storm-dark sky. You pause alone beside the graves. The churchyard stretches white and silent beneath falling snow. Fresh burials and forgotten stones alike hidden beneath the same pale covering. Names vanish. Paths disappear. Boundaries soften beneath winter until the whole place becomes less a field of graves and more a single quiet landscape of memory. No movement. No voices. Only snow falling steadily through lantern light. And standing there beneath the bell tower while winter settles deeper over the valley, you begin feeling the strange stillness at the heart of this life, the patience of earth, the slow turning of seasons, the endless rhythm of bells and burials and snowfall carrying every soul gently towards silence. By the final week of deep winter, the valley seems to exist entirely within candlelight and snow. The roads lie half buried beneath white drifts. Frost flowers bloom across shutter windows each morning. Chimneys smoke from dawn until long after dark while villagers move through the lanes wrapped in heavy wool and silence. Even the dogs bark less now, as though cold itself has convinced them conversation requires unnecessary effort. And still the bells continue. Always the bells. Before dawn, at prayer hours, across snowy fields and frozen orchards, their sound drifts through every day of your life now, until you no longer notice it fully unless silence suddenly replaces it. You wake before sunrise beneath the familiar wool blankets in the shed beside the church wall. The rosemary and lavender martyr hung weeks earlier have dried crisp above the hearth. Your boots wait near the embers still dusted faintly with frozen mud. Outside, wind brushes softly against the walls while snow creaks under shifting branches. For a moment you remain still beneath the blankets, listening. The churchyard breathes quietly beyond the door. No footsteps yet. No voices. Only winter. You rise slowly, joints aching in the ordinary familiar way they always do now after weeks of digging frozen ground. The little hearth glows faintly beneath grey ash. You feed it kindling and watch tiny flames awaken carefully in the dimness. Simple comforts matter more during winters like this. Warm hands, dry socks, soup with actual onions. You have learned not to underestimate any of them. Outside, dawn arrives pale blue across the snow-covered graves. Frost shines along every stone and wooden cross. The ash tree stands motionless beneath a sky clear enough to promise harder cold by nightfall. Odo waits near the gate, already carrying a shovel. "You're slower lately," he grumbles. "You're older lately." He considers this. Fair. Together you walk the churchyard paths one more time beneath the waking sky. Your boots know every turn now, every leaning marker, every uneven patch beneath the snow where old graves settled years ago. Near the yew trees, the miller's son repairs a cracked boundary post without being asked. Ravens watch from the bell tower roof. Smoke rises quietly from cottages below the hill, where the village slowly wakes around cook fires and cold breakfasts. The whole world feels smaller in winter. Closer. More careful. Father Aldrich joins you after morning prayers carrying a lantern, though daylight has already come. Habit, perhaps, or comfort. The abbey roads may open soon, he says softly. Spring eventually approaching, though impossible to imagine yet. You pause beside Harlan's grave where snow has drifted nearly level with the wooden cross. The tiny beeswax candle left months earlier remains frozen into the earth, buried halfway beneath ice. Marta insisted on replacing it twice. "Bees remember kindness," she said. No one argued. The morning passes quietly. No funerals today. No disputes. Only small tasks beneath the cold sun, clearing snow from the porch steps, tightening loose boards on the shed roof, carrying wood into the church before another freeze tonight. The sort of ordinary labour that fills most medieval lives. Not battles, not glorious adventures, just hands working steadily against weather and time. By afternoon, clouds gather softly over the valley once more. Snow threatens again. Villagers move carefully through the lanes carrying bread, kindling, baskets of onions, wool blankets aired briefly in the pale sunlight before night returns. Inside the church, candles flicker warmly against old stone walls while Father Aldrich copies burial records beside the altar. Names, dates, small histories reduced carefully into ink. You stand nearby watching snow begin once more beyond the narrow windows. "Do you ever forget them?" you ask quietly. The priest looks up. "The dead." You nod. He closes the ledger gently. Sometimes faces fade, he admits, but not entirely. Outside, the bells begin again for evening prayer. Slow. Deep. Familiar as breathing now. As dust settles across the valley, villagers gather inside the church carrying lanterns through the falling snow. Their boots leave wet prints across the stone floor. Cloaks steam gently near the candle warmth. Somewhere a child yawns loudly enough to earn disapproving looks from 3 separate grandmothers at once. The service remains simple. Prayers, soft hymns, the crackle of candles, snow whispering against stained glass, and while the voices rise quietly beneath the rafters overhead, you feel the long winter itself settling softer around the edges somehow. Less harsh now, less lonely. Afterward, people drift home slowly through the churchyard gate with lanterns glowing gold against the dark snow. One by one the lights vanish down narrow village lanes until only the church remains illuminated upon the hill. You linger outside beside the graves. The snowfall thickens gently. Large slow flakes turning the world quiet again. Odo has already gone to sleep. Father Aldrich extinguishes candles within the church one by one until only faint light glows through the windows. Soon that too fades. Then there is only snow. The churchyard stretches around you pale and endless beneath the night sky. Ancient stones, fresh graves, forgotten names sleeping together beneath layers of frost and earth and drifting winter silence. No fear remains in it now, only stillness. The kind that comes after long days of work finally completed. You walk slowly toward the shed beside the wall, while bells from the distant abbey echo faintly through the dark valley one final time. Their sound rolls softly across the snow-covered fields, across frozen roads and silent orchards and sleeping cottages, until even the echoes begin fading into the winter night. Inside the shed, the little hearth still glows warmly beneath the ashes. You remove your boots, hang your cloak, wrap yourself once more beneath heavy wool blankets while the rosemary scent drifts softly through the dimness overhead. Outside, snow continues falling across the churchyard. Gentle now, almost soundless. The graves disappear deeper beneath white drifts. The bell tower fades into darkness, everything resting, until at last there is only darkness, snowfall, and the deep, comforting silence of the sleeping valley beyond the graves.